We will offer this session to our members after the fact if anyone is unable to make it, or if you are knowing somebody who was unable to make this presentation but wanted to be here for it. I want to welcome you all for coming here. My name is Mel Willer. I use they, them pronouns, and I am the Senior Manager of Education for the Canadian Housing Renewal Association, as well as the Chartered Institute of Housing Canada. I have kind of a fun dual role there. And one of the great things I get to do within this role is webinar series and education opportunities for people who are working in the social housing and homelessness sector across Canada. And it's honestly been one of the coolest things gotten to do. I've gotten to meet some great people. The session we have today arose from seeing a post on LinkedIn, and I thought this is fantastic. Let's bring this information to our members. And I'm always looking for new ideas for our program and for our webinar. So if you have an idea, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. Having said that, I do just want to give a brief land acknowledgement, and then I am going to pass it over to our presenters today. I want to acknowledge that I am located in what is colonially known as Edmonton and Amiskwaciwâskahikan on Treaty 6 territory here in Alberta. I acknowledge that I and the rest of Canada works across traditional and ancestral territories of many Indigenous peoples. And this includes, the Siksika, the Kainai, the Piikani First Nations here in Alberta, Tsuut'ina. We've got the Métis Nations of Alberta, as well as the Dene, Nakota Sioux, and more. While we're working in housing, it's really important to recognize that housing and social housing needs to happen from a reconciliation and from a decolonized lens. And in the spirit of that, it's recognizing that we will need to have land back in practice to make housing a reality for all Canadians. I encourage you in this moment to put your name in the chat. Let us know where you're from, your own little personal land acknowledgement if you'd like to give it. And I look forward to hearing the presentation. I'm going to pass it on now.
Great. Thank you so much, Mel. And thanks everyone for joining the webinar today. We're really delighted that you've chosen to sign up and spend your morning or afternoon, depending what time zone you're in with us. So my name is Sarah Buehler. I am a faculty member at the College of Law at the University of Saskatchewan in Saskatoon, also Treaty 6 territory and the homeland of the Métis. And I'm really delighted that co-presenting with me today about our research are two brilliant law students. And so I'm going to just turn it over to them just to super quick introduce themselves to you, and then we will go start our presentation. So Veronica, first to you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Veronica. So I'm a second-year law student at the University of Saskatchewan. And that's kind of it. My pronouns are she, her.
Great. Reha?
Hi, everyone. My name is Reha, pronounced she, her, L. And I am a JD BCL dual degree student at McGill University.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And you're both Reha and Veronica were involved in many aspects of our research project. And I was really happy that they were able to come back and present this work with me. So we're going to share a PowerPoint and tell you a little bit about our research project, which is all about imagining a sort of law reform and policy reform to take on what we're calling a youth-centered and human rights-centered approach to eviction when it comes to youth and young people. And throughout, I welcome to, if you have questions, to put them in the chat. We'll probably look at those at the end of the presentation. Really interested also to hear your thoughts at the end of the presentation about the work that you do and how you might incorporate some of the ideas from this presentation into your work. So I'm going to start with sharing my slides, and I'm hoping that this works. Can everyone see my screen? Yes. Okay. Wonderful. Okay, so we're going to be talking to you today about this project that we did that was in collaboration. We received funding, and I want to acknowledge the funder, Making the Shift. We worked in collaboration with two national housing rights organizations, the Canadian Centre for Housing Rights and the National Right to Housing Network. We're going to share insights from this project and talk to you a little bit about some exciting developments in terms of a submission that we made to the Federal Housing Advocate about this work as well. Our central research question for our project was to think, what could Canadian eviction legal systems look like? What would they be like if they were truly youth-centered and took the human right to housing seriously? So the project took about 3 years, and a centerpiece of the project were 2 youth workshops that we held, one in Saskatoon and one in Toronto. And I'll tell you a little bit more about the workshops in a second. But basically, we brought together 41 young people who had lived experience of housing precarity and eviction, and to talk to them about their ideas about how we could transform current approaches and imagine what a human rights and youth-centered approach to eviction could look like. We published several reports, and also, as I mentioned, we made a submission to the Federal Housing Advocate about our work and about our recommendations. We're going to share at the end, I'll share the link to the website if you're interested in reading any of the reports. I know the youth who were involved in the research were really emphatic that they wanted their work and the ideas that they had to be mobilized and to be taken up. And so, the more people who read about the work, the better from our perspective. So today we're going to just share a little bit about what we did and what we learned. But first, I just wanted to share a little bit of background to the project. And I know I don't know everyone who's in the webinar today, but I understand that everyone is involved in some way with housing and a commitment, I'm sure, to human rights in housing. And you probably have various levels of understanding and experience with some of what we're going to talk about here. But I'll just give a little bit of background from our perspective about our research. So first of all, we know from research that's out there that youth and young adults are more likely than most other groups to face eviction from rental housing in Canada. We know also that young people who are also Indigenous, who are racialized, who are newcomers, who are single parents or members of the LGBTQ2S+ community, or youth who have disabilities are even more likely to be impacted. So eviction is not a phenomenon that affects renters equally. It's the groups that are already most vulnerable are also most likely to face eviction. We know that there's another piece is the impacts of eviction on youth. And we looked at as part of our research for this project, we looked at the studies that have been done. Mostly they're American, but there's some growing field of research in Canada as well that looks at the impacts of eviction. And we know that research shows that eviction from rental housing is associated with a whole range of negative social, economic, and negative health outcomes for those who are impacted by it. And research further shows that eviction can be particularly harmful for young people. We know that eviction can lead to homelessness. It's a major a major cause of homelessness. And we know that can also, even if someone is able to somehow find housing following eviction, research has shown that people who've had a history of eviction are very unlikely to find better housing in the future, but eviction can sort of trigger an ongoing cycle of housing instability. Eviction is actually also associated with a whole range of other negative consequences, including child apprehension. If people lose their housing, they're more vulnerable to having their children apprehended. It's linked with poor educational outcomes. I actually just was reading a research report today that talked about the impact on schooling. And so that's something that specifically impacts youth. And it's also associated with, there's a lot of research actually by health researchers that show that eviction is associated with a lot of negative health outcomes as well. There's one researcher, Megan Hatch, who wrote, sort of summed all of this up, saying that for young adults and youth, quote, eviction is bad for your health. So we also, as our part of our project, looked at, what does international human rights law, what does the right to housing have to say to us about eviction? And so just we published a blog report that summarizes the research in this area, and I'll give you again the link later if you're interested in looking at international human rights law and what it has to say about eviction. But just to summarize really quickly, in international human rights law, eviction is not prohibited, but there are there's frameworks and principles that international human rights law shows us in terms of how we need to approach eviction. And one of the most important ones is that eviction into homelessness is itself considered a, quote, gross violation of international human rights law. We also, in the research on international human rights law, looked at the concept of the best interest of the child to help us think about this specific topic. So we looked at how, at what international human rights frameworks have said about the rights of children, which we've, extrapolated into thinking about like the rights of youth, who we know are also vulnerable. I mean, frankly, we also know that youth and young people often are parents of children as well. And I wanted to just quickly highlight, this is in the blog that we published, but in 2022, a couple of years ago, Canada underwent a review based on the Convention of the Rights of the Child. And in the concluding observation from that review, the committee was saying, so this is what they were saying, their recommendations to Canada, that Canada should consider revising its provincial and territorial laws governing evictions to ensure that the best interests of the child are given primary consideration in all eviction matters. So that's something that an international human rights body has said directly to Canada. Another concept that we have looked at in our review of international human rights law is the concept of proportionality, which basically says that when it comes to eviction, prevention should be a paramount consideration, and eviction should only be ordered in a case where it's a proportional outcome, given all of the circumstances of the case. And eviction really should be a last resort. So that led us then to do a study of what are the current frameworks in Canada? What do our current eviction legal systems look like? And our conclusion was, and this is also in our reports, that our current approaches across the country do not do not tend to take a human rights centered or youth centered approach to eviction. They do not treat eviction as a serious outcome that needs to be the center of a prevention-based approach. Instead, we tend to see the law treat eviction as just sort of a contractual, outcome of sort of a breach in the contract between a landlord and tenant, and not really take it as a potential human rights violation. So that's sort of the framework of our project. And now I'm going to move on and just tell you a little bit about the workshops, and then Veronica and Ray are going to share more about what we learned from the youth and sort of what we did with what we learned as well. So and just okay, so a key activity of our project was to hold these two youth workshops in Saskatoon and Toronto. We worked in both cities with local youth organizations who helped us identify and invite and welcome youth to participate. And these were youth with lived experience of either eviction or housing precarity, or interest in wanting to change the systems and advocate for change. The workshops in each city, they were pretty substantial, like 4-hour long workshops. We had facilitated table discussions. Veronica was involved in the Saskatoon workshop as part of the organizing and facilitation of the workshop in Saskatoon. And we spoke about a variety of topics relating to eviction legal systems and ideas for change. And just a little bit of background on, just going to make sure, yes. Our approach really reflected a participatory action approach to research. And just a little bit about what that is. Participatory action research has been described as research that's oriented towards social change, and that includes the participation of people who are directly impacted by the subject of the research and who have an active interest in outcomes. It's all about developing practical solutions to pressing community issues. And the idea is that participatory action research is engaging members of the community as co-researchers and producers of knowledge. And that is what the youth in our workshops were asked to participate in that capacity as people with important understanding of how the system works and how it could be changed to be better. We wanted to engage youth as lived experts on the systems that have impacted their lives. We knew they had important insights to share. And so we really worked hard to create the workshops as spaces where youth could engage with these questions and build a sense of community and, enthusiasm and excitement as well along the way. And just something about our approach, we worked with community organizations who work with youth, and we had an advisory committee as well as we worked through designing the workshops. And one of the things that our advisors told us was that it would be really important to include in the workshop some information and about their rights to share with youth. So we also developed a sort of a Know Your Rights workshop as renters for both workshops as well. And I wanted to also mention before we go into what we found is we designed the questions and the table discussions to focus, first of all, on looking at sort of practical solutions and ways that the systems could respond better to the human rights claims and experiences of youth. So there was a really, a pragmatic focus, but we also wanted to be a little bit bolder and also ask youth to imagine, what systems could look like if we, had a totally different approach to housing, an approach maybe where eviction didn't even exist, and to kind of dream about what the right to housing could look in that kind of world. So I guess what you're going to see in what we are presenting here is both, super pragmatic solutions that frankly could potentially be sort of implemented today or tomorrow in different systems, but also sort of a broader, more visionary idea about sort of what our world could look like if the human right to housing, was really, really taken seriously. So that's a little bit of background to the workshops. And now I'm going to, we wrote a report based on what we learned at the workshops called What Youth Want Landlords, Lawmakers, and Eviction Adjudicators to Know. And so we're going to present a little bit about the themes and what we learned at the workshops. And I think our first, and later, I guess before we start that, if sometimes people are interested in knowing a little bit more about sort of who the youth were who attended. So super briefly, there were 41 participants in all. The average age, we didn't take a strict age sort of definition. We invited any youth who identified as youth and wanted to participate to join. I think the average age was about 22. And so that makes sense given that we're looking at individuals who are themselves renters, so likely over 18, generally speaking. Youth, in terms of participants, just really briefly, in terms of the Saskatoon workshop, there were 13 participants identified as female, 13 as male, 1 as trans. Similar for the Toronto workshop. In the Saskatoon workshop, the majority of participants were Indigenous. In the Toronto workshop, the majority of participants identified as racialized. And so we can give you more information later, but I'm going to turn it over now, I believe, to Veronica, and she's going to tell you a little bit about some of the themes that came out at the workshops.
Yeah, so we asked participants to describe what the human right to housing means to them, and some of the quotes pictured here were their responses. The participants really reminded us that the landlord and tenant relationship is not like a business or transactional relationship. They deeply implicate a person's need for a place to call home. And as one group noted, we need to start treating housing as a home and not a business. So when a landlord rents a home to a tenant, they're dealing with the human rights and human dignity of that person, and there should be corresponding responsibilities to uphold and protect those rights. The right to housing for many of these participants was essential to a feeling of safety and care. For one participant, the human right to housing was feeling safe, peace, and self-care, and for another, it was having independence, security, and dignity. Participants noted that the right to housing is at the top of the list for human rights and that everyone deserves a place to sleep. The youth in our workshop really emphasized a human-centered approach to housing and to ensure that this right would be upholded for everyone.
Next slide. Okay, great.
And so on this slide here, a major theme that emerged from the workshops was that participants didn't think that actors in the eviction legal system were fully aware of the impacts and harms of eviction. As one participant noted, decision makers and politicians need to be more aware of the situation and the circumstances of young people as they're going through an eviction crisis. And participants emphasized that there are many significant harms caused by eviction, including the impacts of eviction on young people's sense of stability, mental health, education, and community bonds. One participant mentioned that how can people build relationships with their neighbors when they're fearing or facing evictions? And participants also discussed the tendency for evictions to trigger child apprehensions. So much of these impacts echo the research that Sarah mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. So we're really seeing that participants are feeling these. And due to the many significant harms of evictions, one participant noted that tenants need more compassion when navigating the housing system, and also stressed specifically for single parents or other vulnerable groups. And as Sarah mentioned too, like in evictions, people that are vulnerable are going to be more vulnerable. So kind of having those supports to match their specific circumstance. And participants agreed that the rules around eviction need to change to reflect these serious harms caused by eviction and to ensure that eviction is only ever treated as a last resort rather than a quick solution for a landlord. As suggested by a participant, it would be good to wait until tenants have alternative housing so that they're not forced into an eviction into homelessness. And as noted by a participant, the bureaucratic processes need to be adjusted to take into consideration the trauma that it causes, and hearing officers should know the whole picture. These quotes really demonstrate a desire to be heard and also understood by the actors in the housing system. And one participant noted that this understanding should be done on a personal level and that decision makers should be able to connect with people who are actually experiencing this so they know the real experience and there's not that disconnect.
Great, thank you. And I think I was going to speak to this one, right? So, and you'll notice a lot of these themes, there's a lot of overlapping kind of concepts, but we did our best to kind of draw out themes from what we heard at the workshops. And so we also, and this connects to what Veronica was just saying, but we really heard loud and clear that participants spoke about the importance and the centrality of care and face-to-face relationships, both in sort of landlord-tenant relationships, but also in their in relationships and interactions with eviction legal systems and other housing systems. They really spoke a lot about the ways that current landlord-tenant relationships and you know we're focusing mostly or a lot of the focus here is on relationships with private landlords. So you know, big corporate landlords. You've talked a lot about the prevalence of sort of automated systems for communicating with your landlord in those types of contexts, but also with the legal processes as well have really you know, since the pandemic, but even before that, have become, you know, there's a lot of emphasis on sort of automated sort of online application systems and portals and that kind of thing. And we really heard that youth who are dealing with this really scary prospect of unstable housing really found that all of that automated bureaucratic system was incredibly alienating and challenging to deal with. And there was this sense of dealing with sort of big corporate monoliths rather than with human beings. But when you yourself are in this very vulnerable and human situation of fearing the loss of your housing. And so we got a lot of quotes about like losing your humanity and needing to humanize the processes, needing compassion, needing more support, needing more compassion, needing more humane approach, more connection. It's to be more humanized. I don't think it's on here, but there was one quote saying, "We are, you know, we're human, not robots." That was a very powerful quote. So a need to humanize the processes. And I think one of the concepts that would be helpful to bring into eviction processes is concepts about trauma-informed practices, which we're not necessarily seeing in systems in terms of how they're set up right now.
And for this theme, we kind of found it very clear from the participants that they feel that tenants have vastly less power than landlords, and that the eviction law and tribunals do not adequately acknowledge or address these power disparities. As tenants, participants said that they feel that they are in a predatory system. And one of the major themes that was brought up and to address this was education. There was an emphasis on youth about having knowledge about their rights, and this could be done at early stages, such as going to high schools. And as one person said, we should be educating people on their rights, but also giving power so they know how to assert those rights. One group explained that the systems need to actively work to remove the power dynamic that favors landlords, and that decision makers in the system need to acknowledge and address the power imbalance between tenants and landlords. Participants also stressed the need for meaningful advocacy and supports for tenants at all stages of the residential tenancy relationship. Participants talked about the need for legal support, but also for holistic supports, such as from social workers, counselors, and other professionals. And participants also discussed the need for a network of tenant unions. So really getting to why there's this power imbalance, what they can do to fix it, and what supports they might need in order to do that.
All right. And so I think this is the final theme from this part of the report. Youth also emphasize that there's a need to prioritize housing stability, prevention, and what we're calling second chances, because that's how the youth talked about the need for decision makers and landlords to take a compassionate understanding of the reality that youth and young people are still trying to figure things out and find their way through, becoming adults and learning to live, as renters and that kind of thing, and the need sometimes for decision makers to see that they need another chance and they need some support. And so they talked about the need to for more flexibility, more understanding, not just getting evicted right away. There should be steps before being evicted. There should be facilitated negotiation or to facilitate understanding. One group talked about a harm reduction based approach being required, and there needs to be, grace period and supports for people who are falling behind. And this quote, which I think is lovely, there should be housing grace. The idea was that eviction, and they really sort of, we talked about what international human rights law has to say, and what we heard from youth really did echo and really sort of reiterate some of the principles from international human rights law, which was, prevention should be the focus. Eviction should always be a last resort rather than just a first resort, a quick problem, a way to solve a problem. And there was a need for mediation and supports and problem solving. So that was what we heard at the workshops. The youth were super clear to us that they, as I mentioned, were not interested in, putting all this work into being part of this project. If it was just going to be to create some sort of report that was going to sit on a shelf somewhere and not go anywhere. They really wanted to stress that they wanted action as a result. And so our team worked on creating a submission to the Federal Housing Advocate based on what we learned from the youth and the recommendations that were generated by the youth. And so Reha is going to present what we pulled together for the Federal Housing Advocate. And just to also add that we were not able, so all of the youth who were involved at the workshop, not all of them were able to stay in touch with afterwards, and not everyone wanted to stay involved in the project, but we did have several youth who have stayed involved and who took the time to actually review and look at what we did with the recommendations as well. So I will turn it over to Reha to tell you about our submission.
Yeah, so like Sarah mentioned, that these are the recommendations. We found 9 key recommendations, and these are all echoing the voices of the youth from the workshops. So the first one is to regulate landlords through education or some sort of qualification. I think the best way to think about this is kind of like a restaurant licensing, like some sort of licensing program where landlords know about their obligations and their responsibilities. They know about the different pathways before undergoing an eviction. And then as well as cultural sensitivity, trauma-informed care, these are all really key information that a lot of youth have highlighted that they wish their landlords knew about. The second one is to provide free mandatory mediation prior to eviction hearings and provide free tenant duty counsel. So this is a method of alternative dispute resolution because court hearings for evictions can be quite time consuming. They can cost a lot, and there is a power disbalance. So to have mediation between the tenant and the landlord can help greatly with that, and to get some sort of alternative resolution before getting into an eviction. The third one is increased financial assistance, and that goes back to the idea of access to justice, giving the youth more resources. Maybe that is legal aid, and boosting existing resources for the youth. The fourth one is to increase opportunities for tenant education. A lot of youth mentioned that they didn't know alternative paths that were available to them, what their rights were. So increasing opportunities for tenant education is something that was greatly highlighted in this workshop. And then fifth was to promote the definancialization of housing. This goes back to the theme mentioned by Veronica just earlier about how we want rent, or the experience of renting, to be a home rather than a business. And that goes into the idea of getting landlords who want to be landlords and not see being a landlord as some sort of financial asset or a financial investment or a business, but having people who are committed to the responsibility of being a landlord. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, and the next one is to decrease discrimination in the housing system. This was echoed throughout our presentation today. The seventh one is to increase fairness in the adjudicator system. That goes back to the idea and the theme that we were talking about earlier in this presentation about the power disbalance when it comes to youth evictions. You know, there's a lot of statistics that show how in eviction hearings, some tenants don't even show up, and that comes from the distrust in the system, and that comes from a lack of resources and a lack of finances. So that's definitely something to look into. The eighth one is to increase youth housing advocacy, whether that be individual or systemic, and that just goes back to the idea of always echoing and amplifying the voices of youth, and having specific opportunities for youth to speak. And then finally, provide more funding to community organizations providing shelters and programming, including free legal assistance. And I think that just is a beautiful finish to all of these recommendations.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Reha. And we're not sure exactly where all of these recommendations will go and whether they will be taken up, but we are thrilled to report that the Federal Housing Advocate has read our report and is taking it up and is pursuing conversations with the some of the federal ministers who are in charge of housing to start a conversation with them about security of tenure for youth in Canada. So I'm not sure exactly where that will lead yet, but I know that I believe that the youth who were involved in the workshops will be happy to know that their hard work is actually being taken up by some of the people with power in our country. So we're really thrilled about that. So before we close, I also wanted to share just a little bit. So I talked at the beginning about how we were kind of trying to do a few things with these workshops. We were trying to come up with really practical, real world ideas for change to systems, which I think you've heard about some of those recommendations. But we were also trying to create or generate a space for all of us to, I would say, like imagine or sort of dream together about like what our world could look like if we really had safe and stable and affordable and secure housing for everyone, and where we really, put youth at the center of our strategies in terms of like knowing that creating a world where youth are stably housed, is something that we all need in our society. And so to that end, a couple of the tables and in our workshops focused on that sort of bigger sort of like dreamlike or dreaming space, I guess, in terms of thinking about what the world could look like. We had one table where we asked youth to sort of imagine a world without eviction and what that could look like and what we would need to put in place for that to exist. And we also had at both workshops what we called like the art table, where we had youth creating art pieces about eviction and human rights. And so I just wanted to leave us with this is one of the canvases that one of the groups put together. And I think it kind of speaks for itself. The one piece that I wanted to point out is in the top left-hand corner, it says stability and safety. And there's a drawing that you might not be able to know exactly what it is, but I wanted to just share. So it's a drawing of a door, you can see the brown door, and it has little numbers etched on the side, 5, 10, 15. And the person who drew that explained that when they imagined a world without fearing eviction, they imagined living in a place where they or their children, where they could have like a growth chart on the wall of their house, and where they would be able to like watch their child grow and measure their growth. And they explained that in the place, I believe this was a young person who themselves was the parent of a baby or a small child. And they explained that they had never been able to live in a place where it felt secure enough, or that they were able to stay long enough to actually make like a little mark in the wall to watch their child grow. And so we thought that that was a really, really powerful image of what does housing stability actually, what could it look like? What could it feel like? And so I thought I would leave it there. We do have on the slide here a link to our website where we have all the reports as well. I would love to, we definitely are not going to take up the full 2 hours. I did explain that to Mel at the beginning, that we didn't think we would take up the whole time, but we do have some time for questions and discussion. I thought we're specifically interested in hearing from participants about their ideas for how to about this research and how they can work towards preventing youth eviction. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you, Veronica. Thank you, Breha. I think that was fantastic, and I know I definitely learned a lot. And I want to thank you for the work that you are continuing to do. I'm not seeing any questions. Oh, here's a question in the chat. Oh, that's from Veronica. It's not a question at all. It's just a link for those of you who would like to have the report itself. Yeah, so thank you so much for doing this. Thank you for taking it to the Housing Advocate, for doing all the work on behalf of youth across Canada. Thank you so much for your time. I think that if anybody does have any questions, they're welcome to read the report and reach out to you, I'd guess. And I hope everybody has a fantastic day. Thank you for joining us, and keep an eye on the CHRA website and our socials for our next webinar.
Thank you
All
so
right, thanks, everybody.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Wonderful. Thank you.